Thank you everyone for joining. This is our practice of our pilot workshop that we're going to be presenting next month at AAAS on using the 7010-2020 IEEE Recommended Practice for assessing the impact of autonomous and intelligent systems on human well-being. Three of us are presenting today: myself, Alice Vo-Edwards, Dr. Daniel Schiff, and Zviko Murari. I should have asked you, Vika, how to pronounce your last name better. All three of us were members of the working group that spent more than 2 years working together trying to publish get the standard published through IEEE. So we're very happy to be able to share this with you guys and get your feedback. Another working group member who was also part of that publication has joined us and is part of our practice member today. Hi, Michael. Next slide, Daniel. So as a background, as I said, we spent a lot of time, over 2 years, working on this. The intent of this standard is that as the growth and use of AIS systems is increasing, there's a need to ensure that both the positive and negative impacts are considered, preferably before there's a problem in how it impacts human well-being, and also from like a positive perspective, helping people to do this analysis earlier stage in product development, I believe also can help ensure better ROI on the growth of those companies in more productive ways to help make that growth sustainable. There is some policy development underway with various government agencies. For example, I don't remember which European country it was, but one of them recently even mentioned that IEEE had a standard, though I wish they could have actually given a plug for our particular standard since we're the one, but they did mention us. And then recently with the pandemic, I've also seen many indications in the news that because of the pandemic and the challenges with workers and COVID of workers, this, that, and the other, it's been speeding up the use of AIS technologies in many ways. So there's a greater and enhanced need for this kind of standard in the current environment that's in response to COVID. So just for the big picture of the standard, today we're going to be focusing on one part just to kind of give you guys like a practical understanding of how it would be used and from that utility perspective. The standards is very long, so we wouldn't expect that you would really get every little piece of it today. So the part we're going to be focusing on is how you would use it in a kind of like a case study example, live walkthrough to perform like your initial well-being impact assessment, to think through AI and how it might work contextually. But to provide the framework for that, I want to just talk briefly about the structure of how we develop this framework. So since we're talking about human well-being is defined by many people in different ways. Historically in the past, people might have thought of well-being as being, just like happiness, like how you feel personally. But there's been a movement recently that we embraced when we developed this standard towards thinking about well-being as kind of like a more large construct with multiple domains. So as you can see on the picture there, the domains that we incorporate are psychological well-being, community, economy, environment, government, health, human settlements, work, satisfaction with life, affect, culture, and education. Digging into that alone would be a whole presentation, so I'm not going to go into any great detail here, but that's kind of just the framework for when we're talking about well-being. We mean across one or more of those many elements, not just, are they happy kind of as a perspective. Next slide. So today we're going to walk through what we in the standard call the well-being impact assessment process. So we're going to be giving you like a bite-sized example, and you have to participate in performing a well-being impact assessment and seeing how this process would work. This process is designed to be iterative, which means it will work well alongside traditional agile development processes and how products are developed, and also in a community context, how communities and governments, move forward after an initial assessment and then maybe reassess and then have to go back and adjust or revise policies. So in either context, it's very applicable. And the basic stages we're going to be going through is identifying the well-being domains and indicators related to the product that we're going to talk about shortly. developing and refining a dashboard. So we'll work through an initial development, how you would specify data collection or data analysis and what that might look like, and then how you might in the future then move forward after like an initial assessment like this in actually refining, defining and refining your dashboard and using the dashboard as part of organizational processes. So the key considerations that we're going to be thinking about, and we ask you to kind of put on that thinking cap on, is what is the product or service? And we're going to provide a service for today to kind of be able to keep this in the time frame that the program wants us to be able to use. What is the need that it meets or solves, right? And based on that understanding, who then are the users, intended users, or other stakeholders that might be impacted by this product or service? And what are the possible impacts on human well-being from this product or service, including things, like probability of occurrence, positive or negative impacts. And then based on this information, organizationally, you can look at the cost-benefit analysis to individuals, risk mitigation plans, and how you could improve the overall positive well-being impacts of implementing an AIS product or service. Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started in our practice of a well-being impact assessment as an activity together.
Great. Well, thank you, Alice. Nice to see everybody here. As Alice suggested, for the people who popped in a few minutes ago, this is a pilot for a workshop that we're doing at a AAAS conference. So just getting your feedback, kind of a casual overview. So certainly welcome any of your suggestions. I would say this is oriented at a public audience that has less familiarity with some of the technical details and certainly the standard. So that's how we're shaping our thinking right now. But yeah, we're going to be going through just kind of the first couple of pieces of the well-being impact assessment process to give people a flavor of what an impact assessment for an autonomous or intelligent system might look like. So that's kind of these first stages up here, especially what we call the internal analysis stage. So we're going to start off with this case study example. And if I could get a volunteer, could I ask Michael if you would be willing to read this case study for us? I think you're muted at the moment. I still can't hear you, Michael. Are you? Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I had to, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I had to change the view so I could see more of the screen, and I didn't have my mute or unmute button.
That's good to know.
So let's see, case study, autonomous buses in public transportation. Start there.
Great, yes.
Great. City officials are interested in incorporating self-driving buses into their public transportation system. They have been pushing for the use of autonomous vehicles as part of their approach to mass transit in order to discourage reliance on the individual passenger car and hopefully increase safety. The average number of fatalities due to car accidents in the US hovers between 30 and 40,000. The critical reason for approximately 94% of these car accidents is connected to the driver, according to the US Department of Transportation. Thus, city officials aim to reduce the number of individual passenger cars on the road and have received assurances from the company that using self-driving buses would lower the number of traffic accidents. Furthermore, projections from city planners indicate that the use of self-driving buses may lower traffic density, which could draw more businesses, tourists, and others into the downtown area and thus generate economic growth. Before proceeding with the test period for the self-driving bus fleet, and in order to be considered eligible for the federal transportation grant, a formal community engagement process between city officials and various stakeholders must occur. City officials must convene a diverse collection of stakeholders to receive public comment and community input, and ultimately build a fuller understanding of how this emerging technology might impact the city.
Wonderful. Thanks for doing that, Michael. So this is the context for our hypothetical case study here. It's not too divorced from a real situation we might expect, and it's based on a teaching role play scenario funded by the Mozilla Foundation. So you can imagine that, here we're talking about public officials in a city, but of course, a lot of AIS development is done in the private sector. So whatever your particular context is, you can imagine a way that something like this might apply to you. So starting with this in mind, we're going to jump straight to one of the key first steps in impact assessment, which in this case is identifying stakeholders. And stakeholders are individuals, groups, organizations that might be directly or indirectly affected by this autonomous system, by these self-driving buses. So while in sort of traditional product development, you might think kind of very narrowly of the user of a product. So when you market a car, you think about the driver of the car. When we think about direct and indirect stakeholders, we might think about a much broader array of people who would be potentially impacted. So I'll ask our workshop attendees today to feel free to unmute themselves and suggest some possible stakeholders, and feel free to type them into the chat as well. And then Alice is going to help us type these up as we discuss.
Passengers?
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So these could be bus passengers, in the city's transportation system that are undergoing a new mode of transportation, and this might influence things about how they are traveling. City planners, they have a lot of things to negotiate, so this could be very important for how they're balancing and negotiating their work. Bobby also mentioned the police force. So I'll be very curious to hear some of your thoughts about that, which we can get to in the next section. And homeless individuals experiencing homelessness. This could also change their access to transportation. Also some great suggestions from Michael. I see pedestrians. So these could be people who are not on the bus at the time, but who are walking around, and this is changing their lived environment. I think Alice has typed in a really nice suggestion that just, of course, bus drivers who she noted could potentially be replaced if the buses are self-driving.
That's actually from Michael. I added it from his.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that was from Michael. Thank you. And then vehicle drivers. So again, people kind of indirectly impacted who are on the road, or directly impacted perhaps. So I'll throw out just a couple more suggestions. Individuals with disabilities. So these might be people for whom mobility is a special challenge, or the elderly, for example, who may not have other venues.
Owners of bus companies, the bus companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the commercial interest owners of the companies certainly would have a big stake in this. Bicycle riders, yeah, like akin to other drivers on the road and pedestrians. They're all sharing the road together. So, what does this imply for them? So we can certainly come up with more. You can kind of see here how expansive this exercise already becomes. We're talking about very different groups with different interests, with different powers. Some of them have official roles like police or city planners. Some of them are potentially vulnerable groups like individuals with disabilities, commercial interests, public interests, citizens. So even this exercise alone is meant to kind of reveal to an organization applying the standard, just how complex and diverse this process might be. And when they're thinking about self-driving buses in the city, what is really at stake here?
And I might add to that also that when we're talking about trying to encourage technology developers to use this process, this also aligns with business model planning and looking at a business model canvas, because it might help you identify additional target audiences or ways you could get buy-in when you want to pilot this, in terms of thinking about stakeholders and different type of stakeholders beyond what you might have originally conceived in your first ideation of a business model canvas.
That's a great observation, Alice. So let's jump on to the second step here. And I think Alice is going to copy in our list of candidate stakeholders. And I see Michael's added another important set of potential stakeholders. So in this second stage here, we're going to do what Alice suggested a few slides ago, which is to think about possible impacts. Again, this is kind of part of our internal analysis. And I imagine some of these impacts have kind of come to mind as you're imagining the stakeholders themselves. So why don't we, let's start from the top and just ask, what are the impacts on passengers of self-driving buses? How does this potentially affect their lives in positive or negative ways? So Michael, you put this one down. What thoughts do you have about possible impacts on passengers? Greater safety. Okay, so maybe by being on these buses, there are fewer fatalities in the city. Maybe they're more likely to use the buses because there's this option here, and they feel a greater sense of safety. That's great.
Better routes, Daniel.
Better routes. So potentially perhaps the city can improve efficiency, can increase the number of routes. Maybe they could reach low access areas and improve efficiency and reach of the system. So this would just increase convenience.
Maybe in extended hours, more hours of operation.
Yeah, great. So maybe part of the efficiency and timing options, they're able to reach more people and more hours, and that may have implications for people who are working late, people who are coming home, people who are worried about safety, perhaps, people who need to work and have a difficult time getting to where they need to with other modes of transportation. So that's great. So let's move on to, let's look at something a little bit different, actually. Let's talk police force. So Bobby, what did you have in mind when you were thinking about the impact on the police force?
Yeah, well, from one perspective, it's providing them more tools to know where the vehicles are, right? Well, surveillance, right? To put it like in one word, I guess. And in case of an emergency, right? Maybe there's a disaster, right? Maybe there's a riot going on, right? So from the police angle, like they would want to know where those vehicles, how many people are in each vehicle, what is going on in each vehicle, right? And given that each autonomous vehicle likely has more than 4 cameras on it, it's they have immediate access to what is going on around the vehicle, right? So from a police standpoint, they have immediate access, right, to just surveillance, right?
And Bobby, from a more humanistic perspective also, like if there was a national disaster, without having to worry about drivers, you could automatically deploy from different cities, many buses to go help route and move people that in terms of like the police kind of or related kind of emergency response kind of protocols. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, emergency response, other kinds of like social riots, right? And the police has much more capability, right, to have access to transportation, like provide transportation, right, where it's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Zvika.
Yeah, I think we have got disaster response, and we might even, prior to that, talk of disaster prevention. I don't know, Yeah.
So let me just add one more. I think this is a great list. I love the idea of surveillance inside the buses, surveillance outside the buses. You've already come up with these really creative uses for these buses that I certainly hadn't imagined before, kind of using them for these special scenarios. So another thing that is interesting is that the police forces or city governments actually get quite a lot of money from things like parking tickets and parking violations. Potentially changing the transportation infrastructure with autonomous buses could actually negatively impact police budgets or city budgets. So that might be something that the city has to think about or worry about.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think also could be a way to regulate transportation. Like there's so many violations, right, of that happen where there is no way to prove that they happened, right? So given that now we have these vehicles with multiple cameras on them roaming in the city, this could be help enforce, right? Those like just the rules on the road.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Well, let's try a third category. Let's move on to bus drivers. I think that probably many of us have a sense that these are some quite direct stakeholders. So Judy, what are your thoughts about impacts on bus drivers?
Well, I was thinking of the impact on a potential passenger asking the bus driver, where does this bus go? Or how do I get to wherever it is I need to go? The bus driver has that knowledge, or it's expected to have that knowledge. I know sometimes they are quite happy to give me a longer answer, and sometimes it's just like pointing up at the sign that this is Route B.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone with a terrible sense of direction personally, so I always have to ask the bus drivers where we're going when I get off. But I can imagine that there are other groups of individuals who might be especially negatively impacted if they don't have someone to ask. Maybe people who don't have share the local language proficiency, maybe people with mental health challenges or cognitive disabilities.
People new to town who just don't know the area and, you know, maybe they are going to one place, but if they actually talk to the bus driver in a more chatty fashion about what they're looking for, trying to do, they might get better feedback on what they should be doing.
So it could impact tourism as well and tourists.
Yeah. And Michael did mention something about the, replaced bus drivers when we have the autonomous bus drivers. So I think it's a good one to put in there as well.
Yeah. So I'll add this. So job displacement.
Yeah.
Drivers. So would be certainly a potential concern.
I think it's important also to mention what level of automation you're imagining. I forget if it was in the scenario already, because if it's like, you know, they have these like level 1 to 5 or something where level 5 is like fully automated, because otherwise it's sort of in between, right? Automated and not automated, and you still have a driver. And like, how are you taking care of liability, right? If something happens, so if there's no driver, who's liable? Right. And I guess we don't have, that's, I guess, partly part of police force here, and this is where it gets very interesting with how these different stakeholders sort of interact with each other. And as part of the community safety that we put down under police force, like this also needs to, if in case there's an accident, right, what would that mean for how, like, who's liable, right, who takes responsibility, accountability, right? And in case if it's fully automated, so this level 5 automation, which I think it's level 5, right? So then, yeah, like if there's no bus driver, like who's liable? And some of those,
Great,
questions.
yeah, the liability for the owners of bus companies, potentially the city would be thinking about this. And as you said, depending on the level of automation, maybe you can get rid of the driver, maybe you can't get rid of the driver, or you really don't want to get rid of the drivers for all these reasons that we've discussed. So these are things that maybe the city...
Yeah, you might make different rules for,
that's right.
In terms of licensing. Maybe you would license or put different restrictions on a company, or set different levels of insurance based on different company levels of autonomousness.
Yeah, so these are all things that can enter into the considerations of the city in this case, who's thinking about these implications. So again, we can't spell these out exhaustively in the time that we have, but again, I'm just getting the sense of there's really all these complex impacts, things that I haven't thought about, perhaps things that you all haven't thought about. They're triggering interconnections between stakeholders, they're triggering interconnections between different issues and questions that need to be resolved. So this is a key part of the process. In internal analysis, there is this this assessment of possible impacts, but it's important to point out that a key part of the standard is actually engaging with and reaching out to, and in cases doing research or studying metrics about these stakeholders and getting them involved. And this is something that was discussed in the case study. To ask them, what do they feel are the impacts? Or, empirically, what kinds of impacts can we measure? And this would give us an even richer sense than what we could come up with, say, as a city organizing committee. So let's take this idea and we'll move on to the third step. And what we've done here is we've actually pre-filled a couple impact areas rather than copying over the ones that we've come up with just for simplicity's sake. So I've put down here job loss, which we did touch on. Pollution, interestingly, I don't think we got much into any kind of environmental impacts or impacts on pollution. We talked about fatality rate, and we didn't talk much about this fourth one, work-life balance. But the idea of this possible impact is that people who might be riding in autonomous transportation instead of, say, driving, may have more time to do other activities, maybe spending more or less time on driving to work, for example. So it may affect their work-life balance. Yeah, Michael has a nice suggestion in the chat. So what this step asks us to do is to connect some of the impacts that we're thinking about to these domains of social and economic life that we have pictured in the wheel that Alice showed, and I hope people can see it well. But again, we have domains like culture, education, psychological well-being, community.
Oh, I think I lost you, Daniel.
Yeah.
You're breaking up. I can't hear you. I will keep in mind that it'd be helpful to find a way to make this slide work better with this image larger. But I'll just, there you go. You're back, Daniel. So I think we heard community, psychological well-being, community, and then I think you got cut off.
Oh dear.
So the others would be economy, environment, government, health, human settlements, work, satisfaction with life, affect, culture, and education. So I'll let you carry on, Daniel.
Great, thank you. Am I more stable now?
Yes, we just temporarily lost you and couldn't hear you for a minute.
Wonderful. So the activity here is associating these domains with some of these possible hypothetical impacts that we've listed here. So if I could ask Anat, I know it's late for you, what domain or domains do you think should be associated with job loss?
Work, satisfaction with life.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute and I was talking. Sorry.
Sorry. Do you agree with Judy on those?
Yeah, I was saying satisfaction in life because we know that people who are unemployed are the most miserable when we do all the happiness surveys. So of course, job loss will affect satisfaction with life tremendously.
Great. And Alice, I think that was for the first answer, though I think you're right that it also applies to the last answer. I'll add one more, which is economy, perhaps is important, maybe psychological well-being. Zviko, let's talk about pollution since we didn't really get into environmental impacts much. Where do you think pollution plays in here?
Well, we're seeing a situation where we're replacing like gasoline or diesel with, with another form of maybe electricity. So we're seeing a situation where there is less, maybe smoke or whatever.
Yeah, very good. So it could potentially decrease pollution. Hopefully that's the direction. So that would be, I think environment would be a good fit for that in terms of domains. One that's less obvious for people who aren't familiar with the standard, which will be much of the audience, is this human settlements category. And this is meant to refer to cities, urban areas, rural areas, that kind of, transportation and city infrastructure. So human settlements might be impacted by pollution. Any other thoughts about what else pollution might impact?
Health in general, right? I mean, a lot of people have a lot of allergies and different things where quality of air really affects their lungs and, asthma conditions, things like that.
So health, yeah, definitely, physical health. Paul makes a great observation that, well, depending if we're using renewable or non-renewable energies, our source of fuel could actually change the direction and shape of the environmental impacts. So we can't take these all for given. And then let's talk about fatality rate quickly. Judy, what are your thoughts on where fatality fits in here?
Well, I'm thinking that, like, the trust, am I concerned that a driverless vehicle is going to run me over? Or will it be safer? Not sure what culture domain is, but that could be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for these domains that are not totally clear yet, like maybe culture or community.
Government and economy, I'm thinking of insurance concerns there.
And I agreed, culture, community might be also great fits if we're thinking about trust in drivers, trust in neighbors, trust in government or the bus companies. So really good, so great. So there we have multiple possible domains associated with each. There are also cross-cutting impacts. So let's move on to our last step. And this is the most complex step, maybe requires the most reading, but what we're going to try to do is identify measurable research indicators that are associated with these impacts and domains. So what we have here is a list of our domains along the left. And these are sample indicators on the right. An indicator is a data point, a way to measure one of these concepts. So how do you measure satisfaction with life? One way is to ask people their sense that their life is going well. This is a standard method, and these methods are all validated by psychometrics, by common research practices. So let's take fatality rate. And Paul, I wonder if you would be willing to hypothesize with us. Where might we find a useful indicator for fatality rate on this list? Paul, are you able to unmute yourself?
I'm trying to read through the indicators, which are quite a long list.
Certainly understand. Bobby suggested in health. That was certainly one of the areas.
And this is also not an exhaustive list. The standard itself, the document, includes many more. And we're going to, at the end of this presentation, and I provided the link earlier in the chat, you guys can all download this and go on those links. IEEE has access online to the standard, so you can get a copy and look at all the indicators we listed there. But even in the standard, we say these are just examples of indicators to point you in the right direction, depending on your area of work and or industry. There may be other standards that are more applicable. It's just a guiding light to kind of point you in the right direction.
This is Mike. I wanted to, earlier when I was raising my hand, it was to withdraw the suggestion I'd made to place the slide on the first screen in order to assist people with their brainstorming of what categories belong. And the reason I wanted to withdraw it and then I didn't speak and now I'm speaking is because in a sense, the question of making the case for why this tool is helping the group think more fully through is made more evident by at the point where you bring the standard back in, people having thought about what it is that they were aware of. By putting the standard in front of them, they then saw, oh, there were gaps that we didn't think about. There was this, there was that, the other. And I think that's an important point to draw out about the standard, that this is a vetted tool that has been reviewed by many. It's not a complete answer to everything, but it helps cover gaps that the group may not be aware about. And that same inquiry about what is it that we collectively can generate comes up again in this question. And then maybe rather than saying, what is the answer? It is, what is it that we can think of? And oh, by the way, the standard has identified thousands of alternative sources. And we also know that there's more to be uncovered. So it still accelerates your discovery of what's available, what are the leading data sources, and shortens your search for either more indicators or that you recognize we may have to measure things that we haven't been measuring so far. And so it's as much about framing the unknown and attending to the unknown in the conversation as it is about getting answers, getting the answers. I know there was a lot of talking, but I hope it made sense.
It's helpful feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, I do have formats. I have proposals for 2 longer 4-hour kind of formats where hopefully we could have people brainstorm their first lists kind of privately, and then when we come together, be able to then have them see more concretely how their mind was opened, like more, visually from like a metacognitive perspective. It's just with this limited format, technically we're supposed to be done in 4 minutes from now for the AAS 1 hour. So this is a good practice of how can we condense it, but still hopefully make it where you get something that inspires you to look further, and then they could look into, options to do consulting with any members or attend any further classes or download the standard or what have you, from hopefully getting a bite-sized piece that gives them enough information. But on trying to stay on time, because we do want to have time to get your guys' feedback at the end of this. Daniel, do you want to just move forward to show the?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see we have a complex array of indicators from many different sources. Sorry to lose your input there, Paul, but again, you can see we have a subset of possible options. And I just want to show a really simple example that we came up with for this. We have a few stakeholders, all of which we had talked about. We have the impacts that we discussed, job loss, pollution, and some sample domains, work, environment, economy. And we've picked some sample indicators, unemployment rate, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, death rate, satisfaction of life. So this is just, again, a test for what kind of well-being impact assessment might look like for the first few stages. Then, as Alice and Michael have pointed out, this is really more complex, it's more iterative, and it requires actual data collection and measurement. But with that little preview, I'm going to turn it over to Zviko to raise some questions and facilitate our Q&A session.
And in case anyone has to drop off with time constraints and everything, I just want to say, once again, I'll post the link to this presentation. You guys can feel free to download it. And the end slides after our Zviko's Q&A slide do include the references to the standard, to overview paper, and we have a ResearchGate project that I've set up for the 7010 standard so that any of us who are participating in it can post more things and share more things there.
Thank you, and thank you for the comment we got from Michael about the standard opening up to more and more which can be done in terms of this impact assessment process is concerned. We're talking of one thing which we want to show about the standard, that it fits in well with modern frameworks like agile approach and all those kind of methods in software and systems development. So thank you, Michael, for your comment. And I don't know whether we've got any questions which can come up and maybe ideas like Michael has suggested to us from the presentation we had. Thank you.
The only thing I'm thinking of is the difference between us, that most of us are aware or we're part of the group, and how would people react to this when they don't know anything about this kind of work or ideas. So I'm wondering if in the introduction I'm going to think about it, but maybe in the introduction, we need a context or something that people could understand what we're talking about a little more.
Very strong point. Thank you. I think we'll be able to do that, because I would like to believe that from what we've just gone through, most of us might have seen how, it brings in everybody, all stakeholders, in as far as the development or the bringing in of AI or related technologies into the organization or into the community. We're seeing a situation where there is full participation from all stakeholders. And this is, the key thing about the standard in terms of the framework it is trying to bring about or to promote. So thanks for raising that one, Anata. We will definitely take it into our consideration as we try to finalize putting together the presentations and everything.
Yeah, and Judy and Paul, as Daniel mentioned, it'd be great to hear from you guys, since you guys are new. Hopefully, I believe this is the first time you're being introduced to the standard. You weren't one of the working group members like some of our other viewers here today. So it would be great if you can, give your perspective, for example, towards Bobby's point. Did we present enough information on the front end, or what kind of information on the front end would have helped you better understand this?
Well, this is Judy. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it is all new to me, and I would like to have a little bit more context at the beginning. I've got several things for feedback of various ways. Alice, you get very excited and animated. I'd like you to take a breath between paragraphs. There's a lot of content, so it's really good that you're practicing. I think it may have helped if there was some story at the beginning that I could wrap my head around when we finally got to talk about autonomous bus, and I can imagine myself taking a bus ride somewhere that I want to get somewhere that really helped me understand what this was about. If there's a personal story that you could put, I don't know. I think you have buses, public buses in Las Vegas. That could be some suggestion to incorporate a story.
Thank you. That's another good point. Thank you very much.
And then someone's already mentioned about the density of the slides. There's a lot of information on there. So it is difficult to read. If there's some way you could make more slides or simplify the slides. This is actually more like a Word document, I think. When you were advancing the slides, it seemed like instead of going a whole page at a time, you're scrolling through the document. I did finally understand why you have it as a document, because you're capturing the input from the audience. You interacted with us. I really enjoyed that you included the audience. That's a little bit dangerous to open up a question like that to the audience. You may get nothing, like Daniel did at the beginning, until we all kind of caught on that that was okay to talk. You may want to consider having some people planted in your audience that they are going to bring up specific things. I thought it was very interesting that the input that we gave you didn't necessarily match what it was when you got down to about step 4, I think, where you had pre-filled it out. And that was interesting, that since we hadn't thought about it before, how that's going to change every time you give this. You're going to get different input from audience.
I agree with Judy. I would have. I didn't know where we were going at the beginning of this, to be honest. Maybe and I have to admit that I was I was a few minutes late to connect, so maybe you did give some context before I got on. So I found it a bit difficult to so that's one more general comment, but more specific comment, I think, is the methodology is very closed, if you like, and I don't think if you're trying to find more creative contributions, I'm not sure you'll manage to get that, because the methodology is very closed, if you like. You know, I was looking for indicators on mortality and what have you. I really didn't find anything there, but maybe if you'd asked me, I would have thought and come up with something. I didn't see anything on that list, which was there's quite a lot to read on it, as Judy said. But also, I think instead of trying to step back and think of ways of giving, I was just trying to go through the reading, and so you lose a lot of creativity. I think opportunities, not with me because I'm not that creative, but if you use it in a more as a general method, I think you have to find ways of making this, giving more space to people's contributions. So on the other hand, I understand your efficiency. It's efficient. You went through the several steps in this very quickly. So I understand that there's a balance there.
Thank you, Paul. I think you might want to help us further, because one of the reasons why we've had to, to pre-populate is the time which we have to.
Yeah, I understand that.
This. So I don't know if you think about something else which we could do to achieve what you have advised us to. I would be most grateful, because I think it's very, very important to create that creative engagement as we run through the workshop.
Well, I either have more time or be less ambitious in the scope of what you want to cover. There are not too many ways of doing that. You need to either be less ambitious in what you want to cover and therefore open up for people to speak more, or have more time, which is difficult to get people to enroll if you do it longer than this. So there aren't easy questions, easy answers to that. I know that.
Yes,
something I struggle with permanently. So yeah.
We proposed a 90-minute workshop to AAAS, but they only gave us 45 minutes. So
yeah, that's
to your point, Paul. Yeah.
If there's Alice, if there's some way you can add some color and graphics, I'm surprised you haven't thought of that already. I remember you said that a couple of months ago when we were working on something for graduate women.
It's because we were using this Word doc format, so we might want to try and see if there's a way to still be able to edit it live within a more of a Google Slides format, because then I can do a lot more pretty.
Okay, or could you have switch between slides in the document? Something to think about. Would change it up to keep us engaged. For example, if you go to one of the slides that has that domain wheel with the colors, I think that's the only place that we see the colors. And it might be fun if there were little logos to represent those areas. Like a violin for culture, a sunshine for environment, whatever they are. Whatever you would want to come up with. Also on, is it the page 8 where you list the domains with the examples? In the domain column, if you could use the same colors that you're using on the wheel, that might just help us saying, oh yeah, I've seen green before. Oh, that was education or whatever it is. For the background for the cell in the table. Just something to think about.
I love all of that, Judy. I love all of that. Yeah, we definitely will have to think about if we can switch it to a PowerPoint where I can get more of that content in there.
Could you go back to page 4? This was something that bothered me so much. I wrote it down. 40,000 it says 30,000 to 40,000, but over what period of time? Is that per year? Per month? Per decade? It's probably per year, but you know, the scientists and engineers.
It's per year. I copied it directly from their materials, but I don't think they would be too. I don't think they would object too much if I added that.
Had I been their reviewer. But I wasn't. Thank you. Yeah, that was the other thought I had. It was probably a direct quote. But.
Can I say something also, thinking now about the process? Can you hear me? Because I've been talking on my phone and I don't know if you guys hear me all the time.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So I was thinking also, there was, Daniel, when you show the list of domains and the specific indicators in each domain. So perhaps we don't need that. Perhaps you can lead the first exercise with the stakeholders was excellent because it opens up the mind. Then you went a little shorter and then you went bigger again when you gave the whole list that I would maybe aim for specific domains and then only put those specific domains indicators, for example, there. So then there would be less wording and less, because people who don't come from measures or indicators and don't understand that concept at all, it would be very difficult for them to see the entire list and all. So you can take the audience or the participant through like the slide before and the slide before. Just you decide, as you decided before, just decides which domains, like exactly what you decided here, which domains, and then only show these domains indicators, I think. So then it shortens the attention of people, will have more attention, I think, and understand more clear. And then if you reference and you say,
Oh, we lost her, I think.
We've lost you.
But I like that idea that you just have examples of some of the domains that you had on the previous slide.
Yeah, that's great. We can focus, shorten that list, cut it in half, and maybe we can make room for some more creative idea generation as part of that. I appreciate these ideas about kind of the flow of thinking, and Michael's points about getting people engaged, and Bobby's points about kind of the purpose intentions.
Yeah, I think that was related or not to what you said, like building on it. I felt with the indicator slide, it's a little bit overwhelming. Like it's a lot of information, especially if I'm new to the work and to the standard. And maybe it's not information that I necessarily need to participate in the exercise, right? I can always later on go in and find out what are the indicators, right, by reading the standard. But I think one thing, I really like the whole scenario and the participatory aspect of it. And maybe here with the indicators, it could build on that, right? So you could contextualize the indicators based on the scenario. And in that way, it's sort of tying it back with the case study, right? And it maybe makes it easier, right, for people to have a few examples, right, of those indicators. And one aspect that's missing for me, right, is for who's the stakeholder, right? Kind of how do we tie together the indicator to the stakeholders, and sort of so that it's easier for people to imagine what it would look like in practice, right? So is it city planners or the bus drivers, right? So for example, with any single indicator, right? Like let's say positive affect, feeling happy, calm, and peaceful. Okay, like are we measuring that for the passengers or for the bus driver or for the city planner or for the police officer, right? And like for all these different stakeholders, those would be different measurements, right? And what is it? I guess that's maybe a missing piece for me in general, like, I don't know, existential crisis thing with like, okay, how do you apply this thing in practice? But I think it's really important to, when we introduce it to people, like, so that we can help them imagine what it would look like, right? That, hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We'll have to, I'll try to get as much of this in the time slot that we have, and certainly for longer workshops, we can get these things a fuller treatment. But yeah, these are really good suggestions.
Yeah, I think if we even just move in after in the basic introduction, like early on, say we're going to think about this in the context of the case study and describe this case study and ask people to put their thinking hats on as if they're representing those different groups related to that, then that might like help people with the flow to address what Judy and Bobby mentioned about that potentially. So I definitely think helping us, there's a lot of great feedback we got today that'll help us make this better for a short form format, you know. I mean, because if we were trying to share the standard, and if all they want to give us is 45 minutes, we got to figure out how to make, you know, enough, a little bit of knowledge enticing enough in 45 minutes that hopefully, like you said, Bobby, will encourage them then to go to the standard and look up more on their own, or to reach out to anyone who's participated in the standard for further collaborations and stuff.
I'm intrigued that it's the Society of Electrical Engineers, Institute of Electrical Engineers, that came up with the standard.
Well, they started a whole series of, it's called the 7,000 standard series related to AI. And then so they open up this group for people to help propose standards. And then so some of us, so then we propose, hey, we want to form a committee to develop a standard around AI's impact on humans. And then multiple members get together and do this. So, and Judy, anybody can join it, IEEE, and join any of these work groups and participate in development of new standards and or revising of existing standards as they get updated. But just keep in mind, it is a long process. It took, like, this was about 2 years long. So, but the benefit of their format and doing standards through this process versus like if a bunch of us just kind of did a group on our own and published it, is that even though it takes a long time, then we got this international perspective from many people from various backgrounds. So we really did kind of our own stakeholder analysis from multiple perspectives, even in how we developed the standard. So, you know, and there's multiple standards within well-being or within the 7,000 series. So you can check them out to learn more about some of the other ones. For example, there's one related to media specifically. So there's a lot of overlap in some ways because we're looking at human well-being, right? But the media standard as another sub-standard within that's being developed within the 7,000 series also technically is probably looking at human well-being in some form as it relates to how AI use in media might be encroaching on human well-being or privacy or whatever. So in some ways, our standards hopefully can like play nice and encourage, you know, cross use. But there's many other standards that are under development. I believe we were the first published standard within the 7,000 series, if I remember correctly. But there are others that have open work groups that are under development where if you're curious, you know, you can check that out. Also for students, you know, like I think this is a great place, like if you're working with students or no other students, where students, the GWAS members and things can participate. And internationally, right? Zavico is you know, with us from, you know, different continents. And a lot of us, even in this call right now, who participated were on different continents during the whole process. We only met in person live once in Berlin. In the entire time. Everything else was all virtual Zoom like this. So we were Zoom pros long before COVID in how we developed this standard. And it was very inclusive because you have to be a member, but it's a very low fee to be a member, even as a student. And so people representing many different stakeholder groups are not prohibited from joining and providing their input as members of the working group.
So Alice, when you present this, is it going to be on Zoom, or does the organization have a different platform? Do you know?
They haven't sent me the link yet. AAS hasn't sent us the link yet. I'm assuming it's probably going to be Zoom unless they've gotten creative and are using something else. But either way, as far as I'm aware, it's going to be, we'll just share or present a screen or a doc, like we did here. It's just maybe we do want to, maybe we should move this to PowerPoints, or maybe we should just, make everything larger and have more slides or something, or more pages. So we have to kind of ponder that.
Yeah, in particular, I was thinking about the introduction where you were introducing Daniel and Zviko. I would have liked to see Daniel and Zviko as well as Alice, maybe because in Zoom I had it set to show me the speaker. I thought, well, maybe you could have their pictures, but then depending on how you're presenting, like if it's Zoom and you go into the webinar format, I think you can see the 3 people on your panel at the time.
Yes, but I see your point, because a lot of people maybe aren't as familiar with doing the multi-screens or those different formats.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, an easy way to do that might be just to, because on this constrained time, it's hard to fit everything in. So I didn't even do a full intro, but rather than trying to let everybody kind of jump back and forth and say hi so that they would briefly flash, I think we could easily add just little headshots of all of us on that first slide so that they know.
And then you have at the end, you have the contact information for the 3 of you, which is great, and the references. That's great.
Judy, from that, because I know you help, think through things like from like an international perspective. I don't necessarily think it impacts our study, but if I put on the first page our 3 headshots, do you think it would be interesting or useful for members to be able to see that we're, multi-continental, or like put like our headshot and like just like a little, just really brief name and like primary institution and like location, like Alice Edwards, CEO within, Nevada, USA, versus Zviko or Daniel.
Well, I think that would be interesting.
Would that be interesting for you to be able to see that our presenters are multinational and not representative?
Yeah.
We're not all like from one university, where we're like really like.
Yes, that would help, because when I finally realized that, when you got to the slide about showing me where I could read where they came from, it's like, oh, okay, that's good. I know that you had mentioned that it had a global reach, but to actually identify the people from being different locations, different continents.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we lost Daniel because he had to go to the next meeting, and I have another meeting, I think, in half an hour that I got to prep for. So thank you, Judy, for attending and for your feedback. And Zviko, thank you for helping co-present. I think I'm really happy with the feedback we got, and I think it'll help us, really kind of get this cleaner for next time.
I think the biggest thank you to Judy. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
Participating and all the information you have given us. Thank you once again. And Alice, take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.